Hello, I'm Alexey Kravarov, the founder and organizer of Bay Area AI, and we have the first self-driving cars meetup here at Galvanize, which is a data science education place with a university program on data science. And it's very fitting that we have with us here David Silver, team lead for Udacity's open source course on self-driving cars.
Thanks for having me here.
Welcome, David. So this is super exciting. I must tell you, we just heard your talk, which will be recorded and published on Functional TV for everybody to see for free, next to this Q&A. It was super impressive. We had a giant crowd mobbing you forever after the meetup, right? And I don't think that we often see this, rarely. So this is a super popular topic. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got into this and how it became so cool?
Yeah, thanks. And it was a really great event. Thank you for putting it on. We had lots and lots of folks who were just really excited about the topic and stayed for a lot longer than I had thought they might, because it's a weeknight and folks are busy. So I got involved in autonomous vehicles after working for many years as a software engineer, most recently in Ruby on Rails as a web engineer. And I decided I wanted to work on a newer, more exciting topic, a place with a lot of growth, and I got really, really excited about self-driving cars and the potential for self-driving cars to change the world and be just a really fun place to work in, and the technology really captured my imagination. And so I took a number of online courses at Udacity. Before I worked at Udacity, I was a student, also at other online education companies that have other great classes. And I did a bunch of independent projects. I built my own little mini self-driving car. I started a blog that I still write to this day about self-driving cars. And then I knocked on a lot of doors, and I was fortunate to be able to claw my way onto the autonomous vehicle team at Ford's Research and Innovation Center in Palo Alto, working for Ford Motor Company. And Ford is a great place to work. I just loved working for Ford. It was amazing to work with all of these terrific engineers building autonomous vehicles. And then Udacity came and asked me about how I might think of building a self-driving car training program to kind of help other students do what I had done myself, to go from being just a normal software engineer to being an autonomous vehicle engineer. And so for the last 5 months now, I've been working with Udacity to help build out our self-driving car engineer program.
Awesome. I'm reading your Medium blog on self-driving cars, right? It has a lot of subscribers.
Thank you.
And it has all the current information. So can you tell me, you obviously work a lot on this. Where do you find all these pieces of knowledge, and how do you decide what's most important to include there?
Yeah. So there's just so much news in this field every day. It's such an exploding area. A lot of it is simply paying attention to what's going on in the news, both in kind of the startup ecosystem here in Silicon Valley, but also in the major automotive centers of the world. So Detroit, Germany, Japan. There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on that I try and keep up to date on, and a lot of it I have thoughts about and I write about. And then a fair amount of what we do now is actually comes from our students. We have a super energetic Slack community at Udacity, an online community using a tool called Slack for our students to communicate with each other. And they say all sorts of interesting things. They have really smart opinions about things I hadn't even thought about, and about areas that of the autonomous vehicle ecosystem that I wasn't as familiar with as our students. We have 6,000 students in our Slack channel right now, and so I get a lot of good material from them.
You read a lot.
Yeah, I read a lot, but they give me a lot of good material, and they're a lot of fun to work with.
Processing tools to understand what's going on there.
Maybe I should outsource myself to a deep neural network. Yeah.
Yes. So we met before, and I was really fascinated that you mentioned some tensions which exist in self-driving cars, which are not actually typical of kind of the classic online internet startup industry. And one, you mentioned that it's kind of big tech companies versus car manufacturers, and then kind of Detroit versus Silicon Valley. And then you mentioned car suppliers, which I didn't even think about. So can you talk a little bit about kind of this tensions and like who's going to be at the power of things.
Who's going to win the autonomous vehicle race?
Right.
That's probably an open question, but there are a lot of interesting things going on in the autonomous vehicle world right now. So you mentioned one big competitive point in the landscape is big tech companies.
Yes.
Google, Apple, Uber, are building ride-sharing services, and traditionally auto manufacturers like Ford, where I worked, but also Toyota, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, GM, they have traditionally focused on building cars, but they see a future where the world's about more than just buying cars, or their world is about more than just buying cars, where it's about mobility and transportation as a service. So they are starting to move into the turf of companies like Uber and Lyft and potentially Google, as Google launches their ride-sharing services. So that's a really interesting dynamic, and suppliers come into play there too, because a company like Delphi, which is a huge automotive supplier, has announced that they're going to launch a self-driving taxi service in Singapore, and then you can imagine that might just be a precursor to other things they might do in the future.
It's a very smart move because Singapore is small and well mapped.
Right. As there's a lot of kind of turmoil in this ecosystem. There's a lot of opportunity for companies to move into different spheres of influence, and folks who have competitive relationships in some areas may have cooperative relationships in this new area, or vice versa.
It's interesting because after you mentioned Delphi, and I kind of realized there is this big question for suppliers, right? So it sounds like if you're a supplier, you kind of need to get to think about controlling the brain, because who controls the brain controls the body. And so then I connected to Bosch, right? And they have this big conference called Connected World, and they're very interested in connected vehicles. So we actually exchanged speakers. So I'm gonna speak at Connected World and bring some AI spirit of the valley there, and they're gonna field the speaker to self-driving cars conference, which we're doing in March, and which Sebastian Thrun, the CEO of Udacity, is going to keynote. All right, and actually, it's all thanks to you, by the way. It's kind of it's catalyzed a lot of different things, right?
Thank you. You're welcome.
And we'll have a bunch of more things, and kind of we really hope to see you at this conference, right? But I kind of it got me thinking. Right, it almost sounds like multiple companies now realize that whoever controls the smart technology, the brains, will control the whole industry. How much of do you think is true? Right, like basically, is it key for Bosch or Delphi to master the AI, which goes into self-driving cars, or because they do hardware. No, AI is not going to be metal and plastic and rubber. Like somebody still has going to do this. How much do you think the balance will shift into computers versus kind of sensors, parts, the kind of material thing which go into the car?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it has shifted a lot in the last 10 years, and that's only going to accelerate in the future from hardware to software. So if you think about how the automotive supply chain has traditionally worked. There are auto manufacturers, and a large part of what they do is assemble components that they've sourced from what are called tier 1 suppliers who supply directly to auto manufacturers. And the tier 1 suppliers, a lot of what they do is assemble components that have been sourced from tier 2 suppliers. And so everyone's kind of assembling things all the way up the chain. And what companies are understanding more and more now is how valuable the data is, because deep learning and machine learning rely so much on training these big models with lots of data over time. And so leaving that hugely valuable part of the technical stack to a supplier really leaves you at the mercy of somebody else's machine learning algorithm, and it takes a long time to ramp up your own. And so you're seeing a lot of tier 1 suppliers bring their software in-house. You're seeing a lot of auto manufacturers start to bring their software in-house as they figure out who's going to be where. A lot of companies kind of look to the mobile phone world as kind of how the past played out. So mobile phone manufacturers like Samsung and LG have seen their business become a little bit difficult because of how much of that ecosystem Google controls through Android.
Yes.
And a lot of companies in the auto space are nervous about simply becoming hardware manufacturers that someone else's software controls.
Yes. You know, what really struck me, so a good friend of mine went to work for NVIDIA, and they have a partnership with Mercedes, right? They actually have their range in New Jersey, which has different weather, right? Which is interesting. So it really struck me that this guy seems to, they didn't get the memo that Google is the top dog. They didn't seem to like care. So what really struck me, like if you're a small startup in Silicon Valley, you'll not even try to do web scale search now. You'll not even try to do, you know, deep learning on images to the extent that Google does. It seems like these current guys are fearless. They just don't care, or they think they shouldn't care. They just forge ahead with their machine learning. So NVIDIA is making huge progress, and you know, according to kind of rumors, they kind of leapfrogged a bunch of stuff. And you know, you see Ford and Audi and all these guys just do it on their own. And I think like one reason you mentioned that they should, because it's kind of who controls the brain. But it seems like they really are not afraid of these top dogs in machine learning. The, you know, the Facebook and Google's and Microsoft's. Why do you think is this? Is this because they just didn't hear about them, or they don't have a choice and they just have to compete with them head on?
Yeah, I mean, New Jersey's a long way from California. They may not have gotten the memo. No, I mean, the NVIDIA folks are great. They're a huge partner for our program, and they really are fearless and at the forefront of machine learning. Yep. I mean, I think what you see in terms of little startups like Auto, and bigger companies like Ford competing with tech companies like Google, what you see is there's not really a winner in this industry yet. Yes. There are folks who are further ahead than others, but there's nobody who's so far out front that it just seems like they've got the game wrapped up. And there's a lot of value at stake, a lot of customers at stake, a lot of jobs at stake. And so this isn't something where I think most companies are willing to shrug and say, you know, we're too far behind, we're not going to give it a shot. I think, you know, the game's in play, and different people are entering the arena, and it's not too late if you want to start your own little startup. You know, there's a big market out there. Which
is really cool for the spirit of Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of, you know, leads me to the AI question, right? So it's like it's been a fantastic and amazing company, right? And this seems like here's the guy who cracked the iPhone. He can do anything. Like he's something like in his garage, he like hooks up some wires to the car and he can control it. And then he kind of receives this note from the government, and seems that disrupts the whole plan. So what do you think is kind of the role of the government? So the you know, Tesla already autopilot killed the person. You know, if it's a Tesla fault or not, we don't know fully. But basically, I think the expectation is the government will come into this marketplace. The government will regulate, and kind of the AI story shows that it's already starting to do this. How much do you think we should kind of, as an industry, we should care about the government, and how do you think this is going to affect all these developments? You know, how quickly do you think the startups will have to be regulated, and the government steps in? How is it going to change the industry?
Yeah, I think you know, I think the government is unavoidable in this industry. I think you know, there are folks who would rather just be able to do all of this without any government intervention, and whether that's right or wrong, I think it's probably not realistic. We're going to have to, everyone who works in the industry is going to have to work with regulators, and already is working with regulators. I think the things that folks working in this industry have going for them are that a lot of people are dying on the roads right now. I mean, the real problem with self-driving cars is not that you know, they crash a little bit too much. It's that human drivers are really awful. The biggest accidents with self-driving cars have come from humans hitting self-driving cars.
Correct.
And so
the sounds in the way of self-driving cars.
Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of room for improvement in saving lives, and the government, at least at the federal level, seems to be foursquare behind that and really want to push this. There are also some, I think, really important groups that will benefit from autonomous vehicles: disabled people, the elderly. This will be a huge game changer for the way they live their lives, and I think that's a big reason for us as a society to really get behind autonomous vehicles as a way to improve people's lives. So I think the government will be there, but I think we're on the side of right, and I think most governmental entities recognize that. I think maybe the biggest challenge right now is simply in the US getting all of the various governmental entities on the same page. So we have 50 states plus a federal government, and in some states there are multiple entities that regulate vehicles. At the federal level there are a few different entities that regulate vehicles, and so it can be easy to kind of die a death of 1,000 cuts from all the different regulatory agencies you have to comply with. And I think trying to get everybody onto a unified system, the way if I go to the DMV, I get a driver's license in California that is valid anywhere in the US. I think if we can do that for autonomous vehicles, it'll be a big win.
This actually connects to my follow-up question. I didn't think about the states, but I think it's very relevant because I was thinking about the left turn, right? Like imagine a lot of us have families, and your wife, yourself, you drop off your kids, and you kind of go to the same route and you have a left turn, right? And it's kind of, one day you're not alert and you can have an accident. So I was thinking, one thing we didn't talk much today about this, but if self-driving cars talk to each other, they can negotiate, right? So I think that's actually a very easy way to solve the problem, because if cars can negotiate who goes first, we can solve the left turn and protected turn problem very easily, because it's kind of major source of accidents, but the cars will have to negotiate. So maybe at some point we'll only have cars who will have transponders of some sort and talk to each other. Right, but then you mentioned the states, and different states have different left turn rules, right? So how far do you think is this situation where basically only the cars equipped with transponders can be on the road, right? Because that will definitely tell other cars that this car is here, and you can negotiate left turns, you can negotiate dense traffic merges, right? Basically, it will simplify the whole thing much better.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the dream, right? Is to be able to drive at 300 miles an hour in a self-driving car that never has to stop at stoplights because it can communicate with all the other vehicles around it.
Correct.
I think that's probably quite a ways off. Well, I wouldn't say unfortunately, but I think self-driving cars, autonomous vehicles need to learn to navigate the world the way it exists. We're not gonna yank every other driver off the road simply to make room for autonomous vehicles. Hopefully, eventually, they become ubiquitous enough that they're kind of the de facto standard, if only because they're so much safer.
Which
and it would save a lot of lives.
Right? The planes have to be equipped with transponders.
Right.
And the collisions happen, they're very rare, but I think this industry figured out that that's the way to do it.
Yeah, there's a lot for autonomous vehicle engineers to learn from how aeronautical engineering and aircraft manufacturing has developed in autopilots and planes. I think we will see some vehicle-to-vehicle communication within the next 5 years. It will probably start out between vehicles of the same manufacturer for relatively limited functionality, and it will, I would imagine, a de facto standard will emerge. I can see a world maybe in which there are self-driving car lanes, kind of the way we have HOV lanes or the way we have bike paths for bikes. Some people think that won't ever happen, maybe not. It's hard to get infrastructure built in the US right now. But I can see that world happening, but I think a world in which you walk out into the street in San Francisco and there aren't any human drivers on the road, I think that's a long way away.
It's a little bit off, yes. And so I guess the one more question I want to ask you is, Udacity is obviously led by Sebastian Thrun, who was a pioneer in the self-driving cars. And there are multiple other places like Coursera or edX you mentioned, right? But Udacity was the first to do the self-driving car with open source, which is really amazing. So let's say I want to take machine learning courses. You guys have a non-degree in AI. Why should I take AI and machine learning courses at Udacity if I want to be a self-driving car engineer versus other guys? What does it has it going for itself?
Yeah. So I can say something I think relatively free of bias, which is that Udacity has the best online course platform. And I can say this free of bias because I was a student not all that long ago and taking courses on all the different course platforms. And there are great courses on all the different platforms, but Udacity somewhat uniquely builds all of its own content. And Udacity has a really strong focus on pedagogy, on how to teach. That's something that I didn't really appreciate until I became a Udacity employee, was just how much work goes into systematizing the way Udacity develops courses. And Udacity does a really great job helping people not just watch videos, but then actually do code. So
yes.
Our founder, Sebastian Thrun, who's both a luminary in the educational world and the autonomous vehicle world, Sebastian has the saying that you don't lose weight by watching other people exercise.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately. Yeah, one for me to take to heart.
Me too.
And so what we do is we put students through a lot of quizzes, a lot of programming projects, and that both helps them learn and internalize what we're teaching, and also gives them a great portfolio of projects to take to employers and ultimately transition to a job in the machine learning world, the artificial intelligence world, or the autonomous vehicle, self-driving car world.
So I know you guys have actually a car for your course, right? Which you can deploy your code to, and I hope to get this guy's automotive stuff to Solar Cars conference. So when I was mentioning to a friend of mine, he basically said, if you basically have the code which is controlling the car and it can kill you, maybe you should only be able to deploy it to the car when you are in the car. So I don't know if this is true, but can you kind of tell me if this is true or not? And basically, if you really have the car on the road, should it be kind of a good rule of thumb, right? Of like, if you want to really like be able to crash car into things, you at least should be in the car. So be careful.
Be in the car. Well, one thing is, at the end of the course, as you mentioned, students will be able to put their code in a real car that we have. Students will do this in teams of about 30 students each. They'll all work together to get a car to drive around a test track. So we'd have to fit 30 students in the car. Yep. That's tight. It's a Lincoln MKZ, which is a really nice, spacious car, but 30 is a lot. Okay. So I don't know if we'll get all the students in the car at the same time, but it will be on a test track. We're very safety conscious. There are really well-defined guidelines in the state of California that Sebastian Thrun actually laid out when he was running Google's self-driving car project. Okay. So we're kind of adhering to Sebastian's Google rules now that we're at Udacity. And so safety is paramount here. We're not going to do anything for educational purposes that puts anybody's safety in jeopardy. So
we should only put the guy in the car who committed the code, basically.
Maybe just the committer, maybe the project manager.
Well, this is great. No, this is great. This is really exciting, and I've seen people on Twitter tweeting about being in this car. So I really want to see this car, and the automotive stuff guy invited me to see it. So I'm really, really excited. I don't think there's been any course like this where you deploy a code to the actual car, right? I think that's a game changer.
Yeah, we talk about it as in only at Udacity experience. We are really focusing at Udacity on the type of educational experiences that only a company like Udacity can offer, and this is something that, as you said, isn't available anywhere else. We went to a lot of work to try and make this happen for students, and we're really, really excited about it.
Cool. So one thing I will ask you then, kind of to wrap up. So we're a super fast changing industry. You are kind of a deep insider. You've been on top of this. So I will not put you on the spot, completely. But where will we be in a year, right? So next year we'll invite you to this meetup and we'll take stock of what happened, right? What do you think we'll see in November 2017?
November 2017.
Yeah.
Man, predictions are hard, especially about the future. So I think what we'll see in the next year is a fair amount of progress in very select cities on self-driving cars. So Uber has self-driving cars driving around in Pittsburgh right now, picking up passengers. Google has made some announcements about operating a ride-sharing service in San Francisco. Whether or not that will be done with self-driving cars, I think is not totally clear, but I wouldn't be shocked given how ubiquitous their self-driving cars are in Mountain View. A couple of companies, Delphi and Nutanemy, have announced launching self-driving car ride-sharing services in Singapore. And so I think we're going to see self-driving cars in the next year kind of move from the realm of purely internal projects that are only accessible to people who work at these companies to being in limited public release, where if you live in the right city and you get lucky when you call for a car, you'll get a self-driving one. I think by next year we may not see self-driving cars all over the world, but I think you will be able to ride in one if you really want to. You just go to the right city and you'll be able to do it.
So we're very lucky we'll go to Palo Alto and some guy will go to Pittsburgh and they will hopefully be picked up by a self-driving car.
That's my dream for the next year.
All right, this is super exciting. So we'll definitely have you back, and probably even before that, and we'll compare notes and we'll see what happens.
All right, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, David. Appreciate this.
You're welcome.
Thank you.